Get this done fast, Brandon muttered, scratching his signature onto the divorce papers without even looking up. His thumbs were already dancing on his phone screen, texting Kelsey. No doubt. I have a flight to catch in 2 hours, Savannah. I don't have time for your clutter. My name is Savannah, and I am 32 years old. Sitting in the cold, marble-walled mediation room of the Vantage Sovereign Hotel in New York, I realized that silence isn't empty, it's heavy. Brandon thought he was discarding a boring hotel archivist to clear the way for his CEO promotion. He called me clutter. He had no idea he was sitting across from the majority shareholder of the $180 billion empire he worked for. Before we see Brandon's world crumble, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from right now? I love seeing how global our community is. He shoved the papers toward me, the paper hissing as it slid across the polished mahogany. There, he said, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. You're free. Try not to drown without my paycheck. I catalogued the image of him in that moment, filing it away in my memory like a piece of evidence. The tailored navy suit, the arrogance tight in his jawline, the way he checked his reflection in the darkened window. He thought he was cutting loose an anchor. He didn't realize he was sawing through his only safety line. The room smelled of stale coffee and the expensive cologne he used to mask his betrayal. For 7 years, Brandon had treated my work as a punchline. Archiving, he'd sneer at company galas, rolling his eyes at the board members while clutching a scotch. Savannah loves her dusty old ledgers and basement storage rooms. She's basically a glorified librarian. He never asked what I was archiving. He never asked why I had biometric access to the original founding deeds, the private financial records, or the security mainframes of the Vantage Sovereign Empire. He assumed I was small because I was quiet. I let my gaze drift to the heavy vintage safe deposit box sitting on the side table, my mother's legacy. Brandon hadn't even noticed it. He was too busy admiring his $60,000 watch, a bonus he had paid himself from a budget I knew he hadn't earned. I remembered the night of the winter gala last year. He had squeezed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise when I tried to correct him about the hotel's architectural history in front of a potential investor. Let the adults talk, Savannah, he had whispered, his breath hot against my ear. Go check the coat room. Make yourself useful. That night, I didn't weep. I didn't make a scene. I went home, opened my laptop, and logged the incident in the Sovereign Standard database, the anonymous quality control metric Brandon hated so much. He thought my silence was submission. He was wrong. My silence was a library. I wasn't hiding from him. I was building a case against him. Brick by brick, receipt by receipt, insult by insult. Every fraudulent expense report he thought he'd buried, I had cataloged. Every time he mocked me, he wasn't just hurting his wife. He was failing an audit he didn't even know he was taking. My compassion had been a luxury he'd overdrafted for years. This wasn't revenge. It was a correction of the historical record. Are you going to sign, or just stare at me? Brandon snapped, tapping the table. I have a celebration dinner to get to. I'm waiting, I said, my voice calm, factual, lethal. Waiting for what? A handout? You signed the prenup, Savannah. You get nothing. That was the deal. I protect my assets. You keep your books. I didn't answer. I just watched the door, knowing that in exactly 10 seconds, the woman walking through it would turn his golden parachute into an eviction notice. I rubbed my thumb over my wedding ring, feeling nothing but clarity. The books were closed. It was time to balance the ledger. The door swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Judge Maria walked in. She wasn't just a judge. She was the executor of my mother's estate. A woman whose name made senators check their tax returns twice. She didn't carry a briefcase. Instead, she carried a heavy, vintage, leather-bound safe deposit box, setting it on the mahogany table with a thud that echoed like a gavel strike. Brandon frowned, finally looking up from his phone. Who is this? We didn't agree to another mediator. I'm not a mediator, Mr. Caldwell, Maria said, her voice sharp and authoritative. I'm the validator. She unlocked the box with a biometric key. Inside wasn't cash or jewelry. It was a single, thick document bound in blue velvet, the Sovereign Protocol. What is this? Brandon laughed nervously, a flicker of unease crossing his face. More of your history projects. Savannah? In a way, I said, leaning forward. It's the history of ownership. Maria slid the document toward him. Effective immediately upon the passing of Patricia Vantage, all controlling interest, voting rights, and executive authority of the Vantage Sovereign Hospitality Group have transferred to her sole heir. Brandon rolled his eyes, his arrogance shielding him from the truth for one more second. Great. Some trust fund kid is taking over. What does that have to do with my divorce? I have a flight to catch. Read the name on the beneficiary line. Brandon, I said softly. He looked down. I saw the moment his brain stuttered. He blinked, squinting as if the letters were rearranging themselves before his eyes. Savannah Vantage Moore. That's your name, he stammered, his voice rising in disbelief. But you're an archivist. You catalog menus. I am the owner, I corrected him, my voice filling the room. I own this hotel. I own the building we're sitting in. I own the chair you're sitting on. And I own the company that signs your paycheck. No, he whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. That's impossible. You drive a Subaru. You wear cardigans. I drive a Subaru because I don't need a Porsche to know who I am, I said. And for the last 5 years, while you were busy stealing credit for other people's work and calling me clutter, I've been the one grading your performance. Grading me? The sovereign standard, I said. The anonymous quality control metric you hate so much? The one you called impossible and pedantic in your last quarterly review? I wrote it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The narcissist in him was crashing violently against the reality of his own mediocrity. He had spent years trying to make me feel small so he could feel big. He ignored my brilliance not because it wasn't there, but because acknowledging it would have shattered his fragile ego. He needed me to be just a librarian because if I was anything more, he was nothing. Wait, he said, a desperate, oily smile forming on his lips. He reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. Savannah, baby. This changes things. We're partners, right? We're a power couple. Tear up the papers. Let's talk about this. I didn't mean any of it. I pulled my hand away as if he were burning. You signed the prenup, Brandon. Remember? You insisted on it. You wanted to protect your assets. That was just business. So is this, Maria interrupted coldly. The prenup explicitly waives all rights to any inheritance received by either party during or after the marriage. You protected your bonus, Mr. Caldwell, and in doing so, you blocked yourself from a $180 billion fortune. He looked at the papers he had signed just minutes ago. He looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had divorced the bank. I'm not just the owner, Brandon, I said, standing up and buttoning my blazer. I'm your boss. And we have a lot of work to do. I walked out of the mediation room and into the hotel lobby. The air felt different here. For 7 years, I had walked through this space as a ghost, unseen by staff who were too terrified of Brandon to notice the woman standing in his shadow. I was the wife who waited by the coat check, the interruption, the clutter. But today, the physics of the room had shifted. The doorman, a man named Henry who had worked here for 20 years, straightened his tie as I approached. The concierge stopped typing mid-sentence. The whispers rippled ahead of me like a wave. They knew. The automated notification from the Sovereign Trust had hit every inbox in the building while we were still in the mediation room. Effective. Immediately. Savannah Vantage Moore assumes the role of chairwoman. I didn't look at the floor. I didn't apologize for taking up space. I walked straight toward the private executive elevators, the ones Brandon had forbidden me from using because they were for leadership only. Brandon was scrambling behind me, his breath hitching as he tried to keep up without running. Savannah, wait! Slow down. You can't just... You don't know how to run a global hospitality group. You organize old menus. I pressed the call button. The doors slid open instantly, recognizing my biometric signature access I had authorized for myself months ago. I know enough to know the difference between leadership and theft, Brandon, I said, stepping inside. He tried to jam his foot in the door, but the security guard, a new hire I had personally vetted, stepped in front of him. Badge access only, sir. Your clearance is currently pending review. The door slid shut on Brandon's shocked face, cutting off his protest. The penthouse office was exactly as my mother had left it, preserved in amber. I sat in the high-backed leather chair that had been empty for too long. It didn't feel too big. It felt like a perfect fit. I wasn't here to redecorate. I was here to clean house. I picked up the phone and dialed the extension for the forensic accounting team I had quietly assembled weeks ago. This is Savannah, I said. Initiate the white glove audit. Start with the Signature Experience program. The Signature Experience was Brandon's crown jewel. It was the initiative that had fast-tracked him for the CEO role, a concierge program that anticipated guest needs before they asked. He had presented it at the global conference last month to a standing ovation. By noon, my team had the files on my desk. I opened the digital metadata of the original proposal. It was dated 3 years ago. The author was listed as S.V. Moore. Brandon hadn't invented the program. He had stolen it from a proposal I wrote over a weekend to help him when he was drowning in deadlines. He had taken my work, stripped my name from the header, changed the font, and sold it to the board as his own genius. He had built his entire reputation as a visionary on the intellectual property of the wife he called simple. I looked at the timestamps. I looked at the edits. I saw the comments where he had mocked the very ideas he later claimed credit for. He didn't just steal my money, I whispered to the empty room. He stole my mind. But theft of ideas was hard to prove in a boardroom. It was, he said, she said, I needed something harder, I needed numbers. I turned to the second pile of documents, the vendor contracts. The audit was just warming up, and I was about to find out exactly how expensive Brandon's arrogance had been. Brandon didn't just panic, he mobilized. Within an hour, he was trying to rally the board, spinning a narrative of a hostile takeover led by a vindictive ex-wife. I watched on the security feed as he paced in the main conference room, shouting at the directors, his face flushed. She's unstable! She doesn't understand the hospitality industry. She's trying to burn the company down out of spite because I left her. He was desperate. He was dangerous. But he was also incredibly sloppy. I walked into the boardroom. He stopped shouting mid-sentence. The directors looked at me, some with curiosity, some with fear, others with the dawning realization that the power dynamic had shifted tectonically. He says I'm emotional, I said, my voice cutting through the tension as I placed a stack of files on the polished table. He says this is personal. Let's look at the numbers. I signaled to the IT director, who was already on my side, to project the spreadsheet onto the wall. This is the vendor list for our exclusive events division, I said, using a laser pointer to highlight a series of payments. Can anyone tell me why we are paying $4.8 million a year to a catering company registered to a residential address in New Jersey? The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector. That address, I continued, belongs to Kelsey, Mr. Caldwell's personal assistant. Brandon went pale, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit or an ally. That's a legitimate vendor. They do high-end consulting. It's a retainer. We checked the invoices, I said, flipping to the next slide. They bill us for conceptual design and lifestyle curation. There are no deliverables. There are no events. There are no menus. It's a shell company, Brandon. You've been siphoning the operating budget to fund your mistress's lifestyle and your own gambling debts. The board members gasped. This wasn't a bad breakup, or a difference of opinion. This was federal wire fraud. This was embezzlement on a massive scale. You're done, the chairman of the board whispered, looking at Brandon with unmasked disgust. I want my severance. Brandon screamed, losing all composure, his carefully crafted persona shattering into pieces. I have a contract. $6 million. You can't touch it. It's in my employment agreement. Actually, I said, pulling one final document from my folder. I slid the paper across the long table toward him. The integrity clause. Do you remember this, Brandon? You wrote it 5 years ago to fire that sales VP you didn't like. You insisted it be added to all executive contracts to protect the brand. He stared at the paper. He recognized the clause. The handwriting in the margins was unmistakable. His own. It emphasized the zero-tolerance policy he had once weaponized. It states that any executive found guilty of financial malfeasance forfeits all severance, stock options, and benefits. Immediate termination for cause. He stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. He had built the trap that just snapped his neck. You played yourself, I said softly. And now, you leave with nothing. Security didn't take him out the front door. I instructed them to use the service elevator, the one used for taking out the trash and laundry. As they marched him out, past the staff he had bullied, past the receptionists he had harassed. Nobody looked him in the eye. He was already a ghost in the empire he thought he ruled. Later that night, the hotel was quiet in a way I had never experienced. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy with secrets or neglect. It was peaceful. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out over the grid of New York City lights below. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. I took out my phone. Brandon's name was still at the top of my recents list, followed by a string of missed calls I hadn't bothered to answer. I pressed delete. Then, block. It felt less like ending a marriage, and more like cleaning a stain off a beautiful window, revealing the view that had been there all along. I wasn't just an heir anymore. I was a steward. I thought about the staff, Henry the doorman, the housekeeping team on the 3rd floor, the archivists in the basement who had quietly helped me gather the evidence without asking questions. They were the soul of Vantage Sovereign, not the executives posturing in glass offices. Service, I whispered to the empty air, is not servitude. Brandon had never understood that distinction. He wanted servants to make him feel powerful. I wanted to serve guests because true hospitality is an act of nobility. True power isn't looking down on people. It's lifting them up so they can do their best work. I walked back inside. The massive desk, once imposing, was now covered in files, real work, meaningful work. Restructuring the vendor list. Reinstating the bonuses Brandon had cut, promoting the staff he had overlooked. It was going to be a long night, but for the first time in years, I wasn't tired. Downstairs, the front doors opened. Through the security feed on my tablet, I saw a weary traveler walk in, looking lost and exhausted. The night manager was busy on the phone with a vendor. The guest looked around, hesitating. I didn't call down to reception. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked over to the front desk, stepping behind the marble counter not as a ghost, but as the host. "Welcome to Vantage Sovereign," I said, smiling warmly at the traveler. "Checking in?" The guest looked relieved, their shoulders dropping. "Yes, please." I started typing, my fingers moving confidently over the keys. I wasn't too important to do the job. I was the owner because I respected the job. The legacy wasn't just the building. It was how we made people feel, and that started with me. If you've ever had to silence your own brilliance just to keep the peace, this story is for you. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Hit that like button if you agree, and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. Until next time.